How many of you know what it feels like to create a point of entry in your life and with your life? Yeah. It's a man by the name of George Bolt, who was the manager of a little small kind of mid-quality hotel in Pennsylvania a number of years ago. It's a true story. It was a really stormy night, and late, probably 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, this older couple came in asking for a room. They said they had looked all over town and couldn't find anywhere and were just exhausted and needed a place to stay. And George said, "I'm sorry, but we have no vacancy here." And he said, there are 2 big conventions in town, which is very unusual, so I don't know that you're going to find a room. And the couple went over and he heard them talking and were just trying to figure out what were they going to do. And George was a man that believed in prayer, meditation, and good works. Now you're going to hear that a lot today, so go ahead and say it with me. Prayer, meditation, and good works. He overheard them talking and he was moved with compassion, and so he went over to the couple and said, "Listen, I have a room. You are welcome to stay in my room tonight. If you're okay doing that, I don't know if you're going to find anywhere else, and I'll give you my room." And they said, You would do that? And he said, "Yeah, I don't know what else you're going to do, and I can tell you need a room. It just feels like the thing to do. Take my room tonight." And they said, "Well, what about you?" He said, "Don't worry about me. I'll be fine." So they did. They took his room for the night. The next morning, as they got up and got ready to leave, the man said, "You're the kind of manager who should be the boss of one of the best hotels in the United States. Maybe one day that'll happen for you." And they both laughed and got a good laugh. And he said, "Yeah, I'd love to do that." George went on about his life and did what George knew how to do best, and that was prayer, meditation, and good works, which he demonstrated in his life. But about 2 years passed, and one day a letter arrived. George opened the letter, and it was from this particular couple, reminding him of what happened. But in the letter, there was a round-trip ticket to New York, and the gentleman said, "I want to pay your way to New York. There's something I want to do to pay you back for your kindness that night. I'm finally in a position to do that." George thought, wow, that's pretty nice. And so he took the airline ticket, and he went to New York and was picked up. It says the older man met him in New York and led him to the corner of 5th Avenue and 34th Street. Then he pointed to this huge, great new building of reddish stone with turrets and a watchtower thrusting up into the sky. The old man said, "Son, that is the hotel that I have built for you to manage." And he said, "What? You're kidding." He said, "No, I assure you I'm not." The older man's name is William Waldorf Astor. The magnificent structure is the original Waldorf Astoria Hotel. And the first manager was George C. Bolts, who came to manage one of the most glamorous hotels in the world. I would say George knew how to create a point of entry and let good things move through his life, wouldn't you? Yeah. That's what we're here for. And sometimes those things come back in ways we recognize, and sometimes they don't. And so in our exploration this year, when we are looking at what does it really mean, we're going in deep through the concept of do greater things. When Jesus said in the Gospel of John, "The things that I do, you can do also, even greater things." We recognize that Jesus was a master teacher, and what he was pointing to was not that he was a unique and only Son of God. He was trying to say, you are also sons and daughters of God, and follow the way, the things that I do, try to do those and even greater things. And so that's what we're about, and creating a point of entry for that to happen. So today we're going to go in deep and study something that I call the Boomerang Principle. Now, what do you think the Boomerang Principle may be? I gotta stand still. It means, Darlene, you can't move today. What do you think the Boomerang Principle is? You throw something out and it comes back. That's pretty much it. It's called by lots of other names. We know it as the law of cause and effect, sowing and reaping, mind action. Science says for every action there's an equal reaction. Some call it a part of the law of karma. Quantum theory says the observed and the observer are one. Well, I like the image of a boomerang, that what goes out comes back at some point in time. And what that tells us is, first and foremost, we are absolutely intended to understand that everything we do, everything we think, everything we touch, everything we say, that we put our fingerprints, our soul prints on it, that you infuse every thought, everything with the vibration. Just think of it all with fingerprints, and you send it out. So do we feel good about everything we're sending out? In Hawaii, one of the things that, there's a proverb in Hawaii that says, if you fish with foul bait, you only catch crabs. You ever caught crabs metaphorically? If you fish with foul bait, you only catch crabs. That if you put the foul, stinky stuff out there, you're only going to bring back to yourself that quality of stuff. Now, that's spirituality 101. We know that. We absolutely know that. Movies and books and things in most recent years, The Secret, things such as that, have taken that concept and introduced it to more and more people. That we must be responsible for not only what we do, but what we think. Sandra Ingerman, who is a Native American shaman, writes, every man has an atmosphere which is affecting every other. So silent and unconscious is this influence working that you may forget it exists. You cannot escape from one moment from the radiation of your character, this constantly weakening or strengthening of others. You cannot evade the responsibility by saying it is an unconscious influence. You can select the qualities that you would permit to be radiated. You can cultivate sweetness, truth, generosity, justice, loyalty, love, nobility, and make them vitally active in your character. By these qualities, you will affect the world. This radiation to which I refer comes from what the person really is, and not from what he or she pretends to be. Now, when we work with the Boomerang Principle or the law of cause and effect, that's the beauty of the law. You see, the law is no respecter of persons. How many of you have been to the Grand Canyon? And it's just a magnificent thing to see. And if you've ever hiked down in and hiked back up, there is a sign at the entrance of the Grand Canyon that says, the law of gravity is strictly enforced here. 6 people fell in last year, 4 somehow survived. The law, we do not invent laws in natural universal laws, we discover them. Just like the Wright brothers, when the Wright brothers were they had an idea that man should be able to fly. They looked at birds, they looked at bees, they looked at things that could fly, and realized that if they could figure out how to work with the law of gravity, they could fly. And so the Wright brothers began to work with a formula and try to fly. So they had many failed attempts, but never did they say, darn it, that law of gravity is broken. What they would always say is, the formula is not yet right. And once the formula was right, they were able to work with the law and use it at a higher level, because then they discovered the law of aerodynamics. So that's exactly what happens in our life in a spiritual context. The law, we understand God as principle and presence. God is presence. In God we live and move and have our being. God is love. God is source. God is energy. God is all that is seen and unseen. And all that is operates. It acts in a certain way. You plant something in the ground, it grows. That's principle. That's how the thing works. In our life, our goal is to always be in relationship with this presence and principle. The Temple of Solomon, which is a real temple, but it also was built to be a symbol of, the temple was a symbol of the individual. The Holy of Holies is who we are. There are twin pillars before you walk into Solomon's temple. One pillar is known as universal presence. The other pillar is known as universal principle. And it is said that all who walk in and gain entrance are constantly knowing how to be in relationship and in balance with those two.